Hello everyone, my name is Osvaldo Quintero and I am an aerospace engineering major from Texas A&M University. Over the summer, I've been working on a high throughput analysis of ductile fracture using surrogate modeling. The professors and graduate students that have provided mentorship and assistance include Dr. Amin Benzerga, Dr. Aitor Cruzado, Vignesh, and Francisco. Furthermore, Justin Oka from UT has been my fellow undergraduate working under Dr. Benzerga. This research would not have been possible without the support of the online REU program at Texas A&M and the Department of Energy National Nuclear Security Administration under award number DENA 0003857. The principal goal of this research was to construct a simulation procedure for predicting the progression of damage in metallic structures that undergo high integrity risk. The research I conducted was governed by high throughput analysis of ductile fracture using surrogate modeling. These high throughput simulations that I generated were then passed to my fellow undergrad who used machine learning to provide an autonomous uncertainty quantification to the large number of generated simulations. The end goal for this work was to construct a tool that could compute statistically meaningful responses at a high efficient rate by using machine learning to conduct a large number of parallel simulations and a surrogate model to track the spatial distributions of heterogeneities. The surrogate modeling that I worked with over the summer was conducted using two scripts, the foundational failure simulator and the high throughput lambda simulator. The failure simulator served as a basis of the lambda simulator. Through the failure simulator, we tried to determine if the code layout seen in the figure to the left would successfully generate data for the fracture, strain, and triaxiality. A closer look at the figure would show that the failure simulator takes in 6 user inputs, performs calculations using 3 functions and 2 loops, and then outputs the values of strain to failure and triaxiality. The calculations performed in the failure simulator were calculated over a range of triaxiality values from t equals 0.35 to t equals 3, with increments of 0.05. The inner loop of the code is governed by the calculated value for the fracture criterion, whose equation can be seen to the right. The values used to calculate the fracture criterion include porosity growth, void aspect ratio, and equivalent strain. If the fracture criterion was positive, then the next triaxiality value was used, and if the fracture criterion was negative, the loop would run an updated calculation of F, W, and sigma EQ. All equations used can be seen to the right. Once all of the calculations were verified from the failure simulator, work began on developing the high-throughput lambda simulator. As a whole, the lambda simulator serves to track the evolution of spatial distributions of heterogeneities caused by increasing stress on a material. For the unfamiliar, there are 3 types of spatial distributions that can form on a material when increasing stress is applied. These include random distributions, cluster distributions, and ordered distributions of voids. The way that the lambda simulator works is that we initially work with a 2-dimensional box with dimensions of 1 by 1. Then we generate either ordered, random, or clustered void centers on the box using the generate realization function. These void centers and box dimensions are evolved using the equations to the right. These evolved void centers and box dimensions are then supplied to the statistical parameters function, which calculates the values of the mean, variance, and lambda, and also delta lambda. The plot on the left is the fracture locus. This plot shows the fracture strain curves for increasing triaxiality for the 3 spatial distributions. The ordered distribution tends to initially have the lowest fracture strain curves when compared to the clustered and random distributions at lower triaxiality values. And something worthy to point out is that the ordered would always follow this path as seen with the black dots. However, there are instances in which a fracture strain curve for a cluster distribution will be lower than the ordered, as well as we will be seeing in the coming slides. When analyzing the clustered and random distributions, we can see that there is no predictable course for the clustered fracture strain curves, while on the other hand, the fracture strain curves generated for the random distribution tend to concentrate as the triaxiality increases. And this can be seen with the random data for the purple dot and the pink dot. And if you look closely, the data is concentrated, while the data for the cluster distributions, they are their initial values aren't really predictable. Here we have the fracture locus plots at t equals 1, 2, and 3. We can see that as the triaxiality increases, the fracture strength for the three spatial distributions converge to similar values rather than having independent values. So as we can see on the first plot at t equals 1, each of the data points are distinct, and as the triaxiality increases, the data becomes similar as we saw in the previous slide, where it began converging around 2, a triaxiality equals to 2, and it follows this course seen here. To the right, we have a plot of lambda versus the equivalent strain for the calculated spatial distributions. Observing this plot, we can see that as the equivalent stress increases for the ordered realization, the values for lambda increase linearly. Lambda is treated as the aspect ratio of the spatial distributions as seen in the figure to the right. With this in mind, we can see that as the stress increases for the cluster and random distributions, the aspect ratio will behave in an oscillatory manner. The cluster data will tend to have varying initial lambda values, while the initial lambda values for the random realization is concentrated at 1. And the data seen here on this plot was obtained for a triaxiality value of t equals 1. So as we can see, the ordered behaves linearly, and the two random data that are plotted, they tend to concentrate around 1, while the clustered are varying from as much as 1.35 to as low as 0.95 for their initial values. Here we have the high throughput data from the Lambda simulator. This plot includes over 200 iterations of the cluster realization, 100 iterations of the random realization, and 5 iterations of the ordered realization. As we can see from the plot, the cluster realizations would have the most variation, while the random and order will be centralized around their respective paths. And by that I mean, um, as we see with the red data, this is the random. It's generally concentrated along the path that the data is taking, while the order will always follow the same path. The data will always be the same for any number of iterations that are generated. While the cluster, on the other hand, the variation is great. At most, you can see the top point is above a zero point 0.4, and at its least, the data point is around 0.06. And it has this, as you can see, the data starts converging around t equals 2, and then at t equals 3, most of the data will be centralized around 6 or 7 points for the fracture strain. And this is all I have. Thank you for your time.